All right, let's talk about something that sounds like it's straight out of science fiction, but is very, very real. It's called neurofeedback, and you can think of it as a gym, but for your brain. So let me just ask you this right off the bat. What if you could literally watch your own brain waves on a screen and see your brain learn in real time how to focus better and calm itself down? That's the core idea we're diving into today. Okay, here's a quick look at where we're headed. First, we'll break down the main concept, this idea of a private gym for your brain. Then, we'll see exactly how the workout works. After that, we're going to look at some amazing real-world results, tackle the scientific debate around it, and wrap up with things you can actually do at home. All right, first up, your brain's private gym. Let's really get our heads around this core concept. Most of us never really think about our brain in terms of its electrical patterns. But things like anxiety, terrible sleep, or ADHD, they're often signs that your brain is kind of stuck in a rut, firing in a pattern that isn't helping you. And you can't just will it to change, right? You don't have conscious control over those brainwaves. So this is where the main analogy really clicks into place. If your arms are weak, what do? You go to the gym, you lift weights. It's that simple. Well, think of it this way. If your brain is stuck in an anxious or unfocused pattern, neurofeedback is the workout that exercises those specific brain circuits to get them stronger and more flexible. So, to put a finer point on it, neurofeedback is basically a high-tech mirror for your brain. It uses real-time displays of your brain's activity to teach it how to regulate itself better. It really is a gym, but for your neurons. So, how on earth does this brain workout actually happen? Well, that brings us right to our next section, how the workout works. Let's take a peek inside a session. What's kind of wild is that it's surprisingly passive for you, but it is a heavy workout for your brain. So first, a clinician puts a few small sensors on your scalp. And don't worry, nothing goes into your head. They just read the electrical signals your brain's already putting out. Then, you just sit back and watch a movie. That's it. Your brain gets the feedback and, over time, literally learns to correct its own patterns. So here's how that feedback loop actually works. As you're watching that movie, the system is on the lookout for a very specific, desirable brainwave pattern. Let's say the one that's associated with being calm and focused. And as long as your brain stays in that optimal zone, the movie you're watching is perfectly bright, the sound is clear, everything is great. That's the reward. It's like a little pat on the back for your brain, telling it, yes, do more of that. But the second your mind wanders, or your anxiety spikes, or you just lose that focus, your brain's electrical activity shifts out of that target zone. And instantly, the screen gets dimmer and the volume drops. Now, your brain doesn't like that. It wants the reward back. So it subconsciously starts trying different things, shifting its patterns around until, pop, it finds the one that makes the movie bright and clear again. It's a learning process called operant conditioning. Honestly, the best way to think about it is that it's just like learning to ride a bike. When you start to wobble, you don't whip out a calculator to figure out the physics. Your brain gets instant feedback, the feeling of falling, and it subconsciously autocorrects to keep you upright. Neurofeedback does the exact same thing, but for your focus and your mood. Okay, so that all sounds great in theory, but does it actually work? Well, let's get into our next section, real-world transformations. The evidence is pretty compelling. So, for example, there was this study on kids with ADHD. One group did 40 sessions of neurofeedback, and then they were taken off Ritalin. The result? As you can see right here, the neurofeedback group kept 80% of their cognitive gains without the medication. That's way more than the control group. Their brains had literally learned a new, more stable way to pay attention. And it's also a huge deal for peak performance. There's this story about a 23-year-old golfer who was just crippled by performance anxiety. After only 2 sessions, just 2, where his brain learned how to shift into a calm state under pressure, he sent this text to his clinician from Brazil. I just won my very first tournament. I mean, that's a total game changer. And what about sleep? Well, one case study focused on a woman with severe insomnia. She was only getting about 3 hours of sleep a night. After training her brain to regulate itself and shift into sleep states more easily, she was consistently getting 6 hours. She literally doubled her sleep. This next story is just, wow. It's really dramatic. A 77-year-old father was facing institutionalization because his depression was so severe. The idea here is that depression can be like a car battery that's just too low to start. So, after a week of targeted neurofeedback to jumpstart his left frontal lobe, which is kind of like the brain's up mood circuit, he made a remarkable recovery. Now, we have to look at the whole picture here. So, let's talk about the other side of the coin in our next section, the scientific debate. So, on one hand, the promise is just enormous, right? Better attention, mood, sleep, even peak performance, and all of it without drugs. But the scientific community does raise some valid points. Critics will say that a lot of the older studies had really small sample sizes, or they didn't have proper placebo controls. Plus, it's a big time commitment, and since you're literally working out your brain, you can feel mentally exhausted afterwards, kind of like how your muscles ache after a tough day at the gym. All right, finally, let's bring all this home. Not everybody can get to a clinic, so let's look at what you can do. This is our last section, train your brain at home. Before anything else, the experts all agree you have to start with the fundamentals. Cleaning up your diet to cut down on inflammation, making sure you get 7 to 8 hours of good sleep, turning off your Wi-Fi router at night to reduce electrical interference, and practicing slow breathing exercises. These are all super powerful ways to give your brain the best possible environment to thrive in. So that brings us to the end of our deep dive, and it really leaves me with one final question for you to chew on. If you could use this kind of technology, what mental hurdle, whether it's anxiety or brain fog or terrible sleep, what would you train your brain to overcome?